So our next lecture, even though it's still part of week one, takes a look at really some more contributions to the development of occupational safety and health. And the goal here is that if we understand some historic value, we can really see how things come to terms. And plus, I think it's interesting to understand the historic ways in which our occupational safety and health rules, ANSI as well as ISO, came to be and where they draw their different disciplines from to really understand the rules, regulations, and guidelines and not just follow them blindly. So we'll take a look at the 5 different domains: lawmakers, system safety, public health, government organizations, and science and engineering. And you may have heard this before, and that's okay, but if you haven't, then it could be quite interesting, and I really like to understand the history behind the development of occupational safety and health. So before the early 1800s, we had pretty poor working conditions, not only in the United States, but across the entire world. And people were moving at that time with the development of power, the steam engine, from fields to factories. So we went from being one off in the field to being working close together with moving machinery in factories. And not every employer was definitely knowledgeable at the risks that were out there when we started to put people close to machines. And there are times in which we hear stories that were absolutely true where people would work 14 to 18-hour jobs. Child labor was normal. And no guards or any kind of barriers were put in place with these types of machines that were spinning and turning. And amputations were quite high during this time period. And it wasn't until the very late 1800s, almost 1900s, that Massachusetts, being the first state, put machine guarding regulations in place. And it was called the Great Factory Act. And it went from machine guarding to areas such as dusts, gases, and fumes. And although, we had recognized that certain contaminants from mines were causing workers to be ill, it took a while to really put the controls and the regulations in place. So you can look at Barzini as the father of occupational medicine and how he saw how people's diseases were related to what they had done. But controls really didn't take place until we started to congregate people close together in these factory settings. And so in the early 1900s, Congress passed compensation laws, which enabled workers to be compensated for injuries as well as their surviving wives or children to be compensating if there was a death. And before that, if you died or you lost an arm, it just was what it was. And it was really difficult to, of course, at that time, sue any kind of employer. And so one of the great tragedies was the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire in 1911. And the Ash building was a brick building. It still stands today, actually, in New York City. And what was really sad about it, but also monumental, 142 people had died, and a lot of them had died either inside of the building itself or they jumped to their death because of the fire that broke out inside of a seamstress type shop, right? They were making shirt waists. And they found doors that were locked from the inside, stairwells that were blocked. And I'm sorry, I made a mistake. It was 146 people died, most of them women, right in the middle of Greenwich Village. And so because this was so visible, it was what started to bring together people to talk about different kinds of controls that should be put into place. So nobody should have to be cooked to death inside of a factory. So the link at the top of the page, if you click on that, you could go to a website called 99% Invisible. And there's a podcast that discusses egress and the development of egress over time. And it talks specifically about the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire and its impact on occupational safety and health. But some things that are quite interesting is, the earliest fire escapes were mobile, and they would bring them up to the sides of buildings. And just like sometimes nowadays, our ladders aren't tall enough to reach the highest floor, these may have not been tall enough to reach the highest floor. Some other things, scuttles that were put into place so that you would open up the top of a hatch and be able to climb down. And these were kind of the advent of the modern fire escape that was on the outside of buildings that has been proven to be pretty ineffective. They're not easy to maintain and easy to inspect, and they tend to detach from the sides of buildings. But some other things that were put into place, how about a rope to climb down in case of a fire, as well as you can see a pulley system to lower yourself down in case of a fire. Then there's always the parachute that you wear on top of your head with a bunch of bouncy shoes to bring down in case of a fire. And it talks about here, let's see, we go down here, and it looks at different fire escape systems that failed over time because they were overloaded. And this here, right, is the Brown building, which was originally the Ash building, and it still stands today. And it was basically an oven, it was made of brick, and it kept all the heat inside, and it didn't allow the heat to escape, and with people who were trapped on the inside as well as hamstrung by their long skirts, there was no way for these people to escape. And fire escapes on the outside of these buildings had actually fallen from the building. So we had in 1867 factory inspections and machine guarding rules. In 1911, some states started to pass workmen's compensation acts, and it wasn't until the passing of the OSHA Act in 1969, which was signed in 1970, that really established the foundation for the Department of Labor to create the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which its charge is to keep people free from injury and illness that is foreseen and unforeseen. So sometimes we think of OSHA as its main charge to inspect facilities, but really it isn't. The main charge is inspection. It's to keep people safe from harm. And so we find our occupational safety and health rules in parts 1900 through 1999. So that's Title 29, which is the chapter for the labor standards, but the specific occupational safety and health rules for general industry started in 1910, and in construction started in 1926, and that's the area in which they are found, not the year in which they were created. And this created our structure for occupational safety and health. We have our technical resources, our legislation, our enforcement, and our government agencies which come together to create some kind of system for protecting people within the United States. And this is our current infrastructure as it exists today. System safety was first developed by the military, and before they had a system approach, they had a fly-fixed-fly approach, which meant that they would fly the aircraft and it would crash. They'd figure out why it crashed, they'd fix it, and then they'd fly it again. And they would kind of go through these reiterations until they developed a set of standards and their process called Manprint, which is still used today. And you can find the system safety program requirements in Mill Standard 1882. And it defines an approach to evaluating hazards, eliminating them, or reducing them to the lowest amount that's technically feasible. And that way we kill a lot less people than our fixed fly approach. And if you think about it, it would also be a lot less expensive than our fixed fly approach. System safety is the application of technical and management skills to the systematic forward-looking identification of hazards. So we try to look at these hazards before we have people who are being injured by them. And again, it's throughout the life cycle of the process. And I really like the Bauer book because it not only covers all the different domains inside of occupational safety and health, but it really does a good job of giving you explanations of where system safety or different rules can be used. Another group was this Manprint idea, and this was again another military idea to system safety. And it took a look at these three domains of the organization, the machines, and the people, and how they interact as a whole to create either a safe environment or an unsafe environment. And this looks a little bit beyond the safety and health, because when we start to look at people, it talks about manpower as well as training. But there's no doubt that it's this organizational level. So if we don't understand something about the organization itself and how the organization contributes to our ability to do things right and our ability to make mistakes, then we're really not going to do a good job of fixing things that are out there. Systems are very complex. Well, they can be complex or they can be very simple. And they're open systems, or they can be closed systems, or they can be isolated systems. And we're not going to get too much involved in which type of system it is, as opposed to looking at what tools we can use to make for a safer work environment. Public health has definitely contributed significantly to system safety. And although we don't like to use COVID too much as an example, you can really see how the incident command system came into place with distributing vaccines and personal protective equipment, and how they didn't really have a strong structure and had to develop it along the way. And now you can see the contributions that public health has made to keeping our work environments safer when it comes to this different organization. But mostly public health is known for stopping the prevention of infectious diseases on a federal level as well as on a state level. Where I think the biggest contribution from public health was with William Haddon. And William Haddon was just a pioneer when it came to looking at ways in preventing accidents and illnesses. And he developed 10 strategies for managing the release of injury, as well as 3 phases for mitigating the way incidents occur in the workplace, as well as in the environment itself. And he was one of the first people to put into place or look at different ways in which you can restrain people and have seatbelts for all occupants, energy-absorbing steering columns, penetration-resistant windshields, dual braking systems, and padded instrument panels. And you can, when you take a look at these strategies, if you keep them in mind throughout your entire time within this class, you'll see how they could really aid you into making different types of suggestions and recommendations to reducing the likelihood of somebody being injured. So this rapid release of energy. Slow motion arc flash at 480 volts.
That's the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety's front crash of a 2009 Chevrolet Malibu and 1959 Chevrolet Bel Air. In slow motion, you can see the differences in how the new and classic cars perform in this version of the traditional frontal offset test. The Institute conducted this test to commemorate its 50th anniversary, and it dramatically shows how much improvement has been made in passenger protection since the nonprofit organization opened its doors. The two cars collide in an explosion of metal, glass, and plastics. Where the Malibu crumple zone absorbs much of the crash forces ahead of the windshield, the Bel Air structure allows the lighter car to compress the passenger compartment. The impact is made worse for the Bel Air driver by the lack of airbags, head restraint, and even a seat belt. As a result, injuries to the neck, chest, and both legs would be likely. Consequently, the Bel Air receives a poor rating across the board. On the other hand, the modern Malibu provides good protection, with the dummy movement being well controlled. Measures indicate a low risk to most body regions, though a foot injury would be possible. Beyond the safety gear, advancements in vehicle engineering give the Malibu a clear advantage in this matchup. While classic cars are often considered to be rock solid, this 59 demonstrates how much better today's cars are. And the IHS has played a key role in driving these advancements. In the past 50 years, the Institute has made a real impact. The roads today are safer for it. For complete safety information, subscribe to Consumer Report.
Certainly Haddon was a pioneer, and that really shows you that sudden and often unplanned release of energy. And so the way he broke this down was this was pre-event. So before the accident happens, just don't do it. So that's the elimination of the hazard. Do not construct buildings that are very high. Don't produce powder, right? Prevent the accumulation of snow. Don't set your vehicle in motion. The second one is to do less, and this is in our area of substitution. So reduce the amount of hazard brought into a building, reduce the amount of energy that's being marshaled. And he uses this idea of marshaling of energy. And so the event won't happen because we're preventing it in some way, pre-event. And the last one is to prevent the release. So install non-slip walking surfaces on roofs or other heights, prevent elevators from falling, flammables from igniting, and foundations from being undercut. So prevent the release of the hazard. So just don't do it, do less, or prevent the release of that hazard. So his second set of his 10 strategies for reducing the likelihood of an accident or incident occurring are things that can happen during the event. So you're already in the middle of an event. What can happen to reduce their severity? So this is where our engineering controls and our administrative controls come into play. And the first one is to slow the release. So release valves on gases so they come off slowly instead of coming off quickly, or reduce the grade on a slope. The second one, which we use a lot in hazardous materials, is to just separate by time and space. So you have your hazardous materials at one side of the building and your administrative folks at the other side of the building, or you only move hazardous materials at 2 o'clock in the morning when you have less people on the road. So the next one is an administrative control, and that's to modify the surfaces that come in contact with the people. One way of thinking about this is rounded edges, padded dashboards, barriers that are put up around goalposts, so that when we come in contact with it, it's not quite so harsh that we come in contact with it. And the next one is to strengthen that structure. So do we have fire and earth-resistant walkways in buildings, double-walled tanks, as well as this is where wearing personal protective equipment, in some ways it strengthens us, right? We're able to take a hit, hopefully on the top of the head when we're wearing a hard hat, because the hard hat adds this, it is a barrier, but it strengthens us as well. Training is another way in which people are strengthened. And this is Haddon's rules. They're modified a little bit to make them make sense. And then at the end, the last ones are the easiest ones to remember, and that's detect and attack. So can we detect that there's been a breach, a fire, and the fire alarm goes off? And can we attack that by getting a compressive bandage on place if somebody's been cut? And the last one, and we all know this is so important in occupational safety and health, is to return people to work as quickly as possible and to stabilize the situation and rehabilitate people, right? Because the longer people are out, the more likely it is that they're going to be out of work. And so Haddon's matrix is used in lots of different ways. He has it broken down by, again, those events, pre-event, event, and post-event, by the 10 different ways in which you prevent the marshaling of energy or recover quickly. And one of the ways it's applied to public health is, as you see in this example, so you have the host, you have the agent or the vehicle, you have the physical environment, and then the community or the social section around it. And how at each one of these can you put some kind of control in place? And you may never be able to fill in every single one of these boxes, but the more you fill in, the more likely you're going to be able to stop that hazard from occurring. So teach children not to play with matches during the event, teach them to stop, drop, and roll, and provide a first aid kit, right? Redesign cigarettes so that they self-extinguish before lighting the upholstery on fire. Design furniture so that it's less likely to catch on fire. Design heaters with an emergency shut-off switch. So you could kind of see where this is going and different ways in which it could be used. And this is Haddon's matrix applied to public health. And you probably wouldn't always think of public health and occupational safety and health or system safety. But it really does all come together, and we use these different tools and techniques. And this is a great one to use when you're in a classroom setting, or when you have to get a bunch of people together and they start to need to think about what they can do to reduce the risk of an injury or an illness or an event from occurring. So our government organizations, these ones seem to be easy to think about. We have the Occupational Safety and Health Administration and their research arm, which is the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, as well as MSHA. And of course, we also have other government organizations that are at our state level. Private organizations, American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists, National Fire Association, they tend to be advocates for the development of rules and regulations, and OSHA will turn to them when they don't have a particular rule, regulation, or guideline in place that's strong, or that changes so frequently it doesn't change quick enough, or it changes faster than the occupational safety and health rules do, so they're referenced. ANSI is referenced for all the testing of our personal protective equipment. So there's an error in the book on page 14 and table 1.3 and 1.2 so that you can make those changes in your text if you're going to keep them. And we know that research is done by different university organizations as well as science and engineering, and that it helps bring us to where we are today. So we have chemical engineers, industrial engineers, biological engineers, and they lead into the creation of our occupational safety and health standards, our ANSI standards, as well as the research that's conducted by different organizations and entities. And so this is how the contributions of occupational safety and health to system safety.